Welcome to the Modern Leader Podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover what the modern leader looks like. We sit down with some of the best leadership minds to hear how they've been challenged, how they think and feel, but most importantly, what they've learned. My name is Brookline, and I'm your host. On today's podcast, we're joined by a very special guest, a computer top 10 IT leader of the year. She's led IT transformation as CIO, one of the UK's most prestigious names, the Royal Household, now driving change for a major player within the transport and logistics sector. I'm pleased to welcome Kelly Goodwin. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you very much for the warm welcome, and really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. I've already fired a million questions at you about your time with the Royal Household because I find it very fascinating, as it is the Royals, and also at a time where they spent a lot of time in the public eye. And I know that you probably can't share too much information, but your time there must have been a real experience for you, surely.
Absolutely. And, it has genuinely been a privilege and an honour walking into an organisation that's steeped in history. And the time that I was there, I have also been very honoured to have led a Platinum Jubilee, as well as a very sad state funeral, and indeed the recent coronation of the King. And I think there's very few technology leaders out there who can say that they've managed to do that in a year. So very much a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but fantastic experience.
I think when we first spoke, I must have asked you about 100 questions that took about an hour or so, because it is just such an interesting opportunity. But I guess it really leads me on to my first questions quite nicely, because I imagine gaining buy-in from the royal family is probably not the easiest thing to do. But how do you win hearts and minds? Do you have any examples of times where it's been particularly challenging to gain buy-in?
Yeah, sure. Hearts and minds, obviously, when you're walking into an organisation as a technology leader, it's probably one of the first things you have to demonstrate, because normally there's a reason why you are being recruited. And I guess you have to demonstrate that the decision was right, and that's why you are there. The approach that I take is being able to articulate the common purpose. And what I mean about that is you walk into an organisation and you have to be able to demonstrate that you've walked in, you've really understood the business, you've understood how the business works, what are the most important things to the business, but are important to indeed your team as well. And by demonstrating that, you are acknowledging that I understand. And I think when you're able to demonstrate you understand, it creates this sense of common purpose. And that then allows you to start then building your relationships and then moving forward in terms of how are you going to work with your stakeholders to drive value, or whether it's driving change, whatever the objective is of the organisation. But I think unless you're able to make that connection, it's really difficult. And by way of example, in my current role, as you said, I'm working for a very high-profile organisation and leading a very complex transformation program. And one of the things I had to do, this is a transformation initiative that's been going on for 2.5 years. And as soon as I walked in, I conducted an as-is analysis just to really understand what I'd walked into. I made time to speak to all the senior leaders in the organisation and said, how do you feel about what's going on? What do you think about this programme? Is it succeeding? Is it failing? What works? What doesn't work? And what materialised is that there was a belief from the wider organisation that transparency was an issue within this transformation programme. So I then took that on board, and I also took the opportunity to actually speak to the CEO. And what he actually articulated is that during the course of this program, one of the things that they were lacking was the ability to make strategic decisions which were data-driven. And that was very in line with what I was also finding. So what I did play back to the CEO, rather than talk about the problems and the challenges, it was actually talking to him in the language I understand, we're aligned, but this is what I'm actually going to do and what I'm actually going to help the board to help understand what's actually happening. And by the time we finished that conversation, he said, you know what, Kelly, that you're the first person who actually talks sense. You've really, you've been here a few weeks. You've really understood the challenge, the issues, and I'm so pleased you're here. And that for me was such a refreshing feedback, because I think it reaffirmed, have I understood the common purpose and that I'm actually doing something about it. So it was just really, really nice, because sometimes when you walk into a new organization, you think, can it really be this bad, or can it really be this good? And when everyone I've met is talking in a similar language, that common purpose started to come together very, very quickly for me. And, that is something now I'm moving forward, because there is alignment at a very senior level with the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. You talk about transparency is a challenge. Do you think that challenge is much harder in the larger organizations, such as the one that you're at right now? Yes,
it is. And I think the size makes an impact, and also culture. And I think having large teams where there is uncertainty and unclarity as to what the North Star is, what tends to happen is people are going in opposite directions because there's no clear guidance. Actually, ladies and gents, this is the North Star. This is what we're all working to. This is what the vision is. And I think because the vision has been missing, it was difficult for the program to then even articulate it at an executive level. And what's then's happened is whatever flow of information has been going between kind of executive teams and program teams, something's got lost in the process. And what I'm trying to do is almost actually take a step back, slow down, and say, actually, that's fine. I'm not here to unpick the history. But what I can do is I can shape the future. And sometimes it's a difficult call, because there are pressures on delivery. There are different pressures going on across the organization, pressures from stakeholders. But as long as you can articulate that to accelerate, we need to go slow and then accelerate, because if we carry on accelerating the rate we are, we're going to fail very fast. And these are really difficult words that I actually had to use with lots of my stakeholders, and particularly the program team and my own leadership team, because the guide they've had is carry on building the tech solution, never mind anything else that comes in the way. And it's sometimes really challenging as a new leader, because you're trying to manage senior stakeholder expectations, you're trying to manage delivery expectations, and then you're trying to manage your team expectations. And this is why sometimes, people say being in leadership roles is great, but, sometimes it's tough, because you have to make so many different calls and wear so many different hats to try and make sure that everyone is following that North Star.
And as you said, it is so hard to do, and it's amplified. But you mentioned the word impact, Ellie, which is going to prick my ear. And I guess making an impact is important, especially when joining a new organisation as a business leader. What is your approach to this?
Yeah, impact is an interesting one. And I think we briefly touched on this with some of the things I was saying around understanding the common purpose. And I think I will draw this out in probably two distinct areas. One is the impact you have as an individual in the organisation. And I think the second one is the impact you have on people. So I'll pick up the organisation one first. And I think this is particularly very similar to what I've just said. It's really understanding, first of all, when I joined the Royal Household, it was the first time that they had a CIO. And it took a long time for the organisation to actually recognise what actually is the role of a CIO. Why am I actually there? So when you walk into any organisation, it's really important to reaffirm and be clear and understand what your actual role is in the organisation. And it sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but trust me, I've been in so many organizations, if they've never had a CIO, they think you're head of service delivery and you're there to run the service desk. And so it's really important to make sure you understand that. I think it's also really important to understand what is the business of the business. Whether you're in the transport sector or aviation or retail or whatever the sector is, it's really important to understand what the exec worried about on a day-to-day basis, what keeps them awake, so you can then start understanding the mechanics of the organization. And then I think a couple of things I said earlier, you do need to do your own analysis of understanding what you've actually walked into. So what are the strengths, what are the opportunities, your typical kind of SWOT analysis. What this helps to do, even if you do it at a high level, it allows you to prioritize and focus on the areas that are going to have the biggest impact on the organization. And I guess if you're in a private sector and it's about the bottom line, it's really understanding, are the things that you are going to do going to impact on the bottom line from a revenue perspective? And I think it's really, really important to understand that. And ultimately, these are all, they sound fairly basic, but these are things to get your head around. Because ultimately, there's a reason why you've been employed, and there are going to be expectations from you to deliver. And I think that's the approach I would take from an organizational level. And then from a people perspective, as I was saying, you need to go through a similar process. Because your team, however small or large it is, you have to understand the team dynamics, the culture within your team, the behaviors, and indeed the capability. Because many CIOs, I'm sure you will speak to, Brooke, will say to you, the capability in your team is what can make or break a CIO to be successful in a role. And it's really important to identify that really early on. And once you've identified that, I think you can create your own view and look at what you need to do with your leadership team as well. And also making sure you set expectations really clearly and really early on. And I'll give you a very quick example, because I think it's really good to try and bring some of these things that I'm saying to life. I've just walked into as you said, a role, and the team is about 600 strong. 15 direct reports, everyone working in their own direction, and we're not moving fast, and everyone's kind of falling over each other to try and do the same thing. One of the things I actually did pretty much in week one, because the North's missing, this is how the team were behaving. So very clearly, I had to set some expectations around behaviors in meetings. People were talking over each other, thought it was okay to have the laptop out and messaging people. So from even an etiquette perspective, and because it's about respecting each other and respecting our time together as a leadership team. So I set some expectations. This is from a behaviors perspective, this is what I expect. This is what I expect from a meeting etiquette. This is what I expect from a delivery perspective. And most importantly, there might be quite a few of us, but we are one team and one voice. And I need an element of trust and transparency from all of you, because we are trying to deliver a very significant program and all eyes are on us. And it was really interesting because I don't think anybody had ever spoken to them in that manner. And first of all, I was a little bit, okay, I'm not sure if I like that. And I think when I started to then say, actually, and this is how we're going to do it, this is kind of, roles and responsibilities, going around, making sure everyone's really clear. And I think now I can start seeing small changes in the team, actually. And people say, actually, I think you just need to know this because this is happening. So that transparency piece has started to kick in. And it's really important, because some of these decisions and conversations you have are not easy. And that's why it's important. But whatever you say and how you say it, and whether people resonate with you straight away or not, they are still seeing you as the leader of that program. So it is really important to almost make your mark, as they say, because you're going to get one shot at this to align the team. And if you miss that opportunity, then I think you almost lose respect.
it sounds like it was very much bring it back to basics. But I guess it's all about, you have to get the foundations right before building something so high profile as you are. But it very much is just that basics 101.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm keen to understand and explore your background, being a non-technical and a woman in IT, building a career in a mostly male-populated industry. Can you tell me about this?
You know, the question around, I guess, being from a non-technical background is actually a really interesting question, because I always get asked this question when people look at my CV. And I have to say, I've been kind of thinking about this over the last kind of few months. And when you go through various interview processes, you get asked the question, what's a lawyer doing in technology? And my response is that I've been in technology leadership roles now for probably over 15 years. If I didn't know the tech, then I probably wouldn't have been successful in those roles. So by default, you have to say to yourself, you've got to know a level, an understanding around how the behind the scenes technology works. And I think where the organizations are going these days, the role of a CIO is significantly changing from what was in the traditional tech leader to almost a business advisor now, and who is commercially savvy and really understands how to make an impact on the bottom line, as I was referring to earlier. And so I think from my perspective, yes, I definitely have had some challenges over the years where people have actually tried to even call me out in public management meetings to say, do you really understand what we're talking about, Kelly? And they'll say, oh, well, actually, is that what you're referring to over there? And then people just kind of go back in their box a little bit. There's an element of here, I think there's, when people actually ask you that question, is that there's an element of unconscious bias. And the unconscious bias kicks in because we know that women in technology is an area that's underrepresented. Mm-hmm. So the theory has always been, it's mainly been men who have started in that tech field. And because you're good at tech, you're going to be good in a CIO role. Mm-hmm. But to be honest with you, with many leaders I've worked with who have a tech background, they find it really difficult to articulate to the board what the technology organization needs to do to support business growth or business outcomes. And I have that skill, I think sometimes is missing if you're purely from a technology background, because with my lens, I'm able to look at that more holistic organizational view. Actually, that's where we need to add value. That doesn't work, so it's that whole broader piece. And I think that stands me out from the crowd. Do I really need to understand how I need to code or design my server or my cloud environment? Of course I do. I know it at a level that I know what I need to do to it to add value and bring value to the organization. This is, again, the point I was making. Ask any successful CIO, but it's your people and your team that make you successful. And that's why you recruit diverse teams. Because if everyone was the same as you, then you're going to fail very fast.
That's something that comes up a lot, the diversity of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, the most important thing about recognizing is not where you start, it's where you finish. And I think that is so important, because when young women, particularly coming up through their careers in technology, if they're constantly being asked, you haven't got a background in tech, it can be quite disheartening, and it takes time and maturity in your career to build that resilience to say, you know what, I am actually good at this. I don't care what this person is saying to me over here, because I know I can do my job. And when I've mentored quite a few women and men, actually, in previous roles, they always say to me, how do you stay so confident? I said, because you have to know your own self-worth. Mm-hmm. Because there are many people you will come across in your career who will say you are absolutely fantastic, but some will say, I don't even know why that person is in that role. So you have to start building your resilience over time. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, Brooke, my background actually has helped me so much to actually get into the level that I am now, because everyone says you have a very strong, well-rounded experience rather than you're absolutely the tech lead for this. And I think that's the distinction.
Mm-hmm. I've recruited quite a few roles over the last year or so, especially at the CIO and the group IT director level. And the real challenges that come up time and time again are not technology focused. They're the getting sign off. It's getting that buy-in, winning the hearts and minds of the board. Those are the challenges that these IT leaders are seeing. So I totally agree when you say the role of the CIO isn't the lead techie anymore. It very much is that business advisor. So I agree with that. Did you have a role model coming through your career?
I've had a couple of role models in the sense where I've been in two roles where I've had very fantastic line managers who actually gave me the opportunity to really grow in roles. And what that allowed me to do, because I went for those roles and in my head I'm thinking, I can't do this. They had faith and confidence in me that I could actually do it. And I remember, and I do speak to both of my kind of my role models even today, and they watched my career grow since I've left those organisations, and I speak to them, and I always say to one of them particularly, I said, this is on the back of the opportunity you gave me, and now look kind of where I am now. And sometimes you just need someone to see something in you that you can't see yourself. And that is so important, because unless you get opportunities like that, it is you do get judged on what's on your CV and what people know about you, what you've delivered. And if you don't have some role models like that who can see there is something in you, there's something shiny, then I've taken that on board and I actually excelled in those roles. And the beauty about having these role models was they give direction like any director or manager would, but they give you the autonomy to actually lead that function. And you will make mistakes on the way and you will do some great stuff. But if you don't have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes, the things that you are doing well, you can't grow in a role. And I think growth is really, really important. And autonomy. I've been very lucky and unfortunate in my career where I've never had anyone micromanaging me. And I think management stops growth in individuals because you feel boxed in. So that's really, really important. From a kind of a role model mentor, there is one person that I used to work with, and it was a lady, and she was a very senior vice president in a global organization. And every time there were conferences and events, she used to come on stage and used to say, I want to be like her, because she used to take no prisoners. And what I mean by that, people used to ask her really random questions, and her articulation of vision, the buy-in from the top team, and how she was bringing everybody in the journey. And it was I just used to love even just speaking to her. And as it happens, coincidence, one of my jobs not long ago, I met up with her in a different organisation, in a different role. And I didn't actually know she was the group CEO of that organisation. And then someone said to me, oh, did you know so-and-so is, the group CEO? I'm like, no way, you're kidding me. And then I reached out to her and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you were here. Long story short, I did decide to move on from that role for various reasons. And when I left, I spoke to her and I said, I've never had the time to say this to you directly, but I said, I've always admired what you do. And I said, even now, I said, where you've come from, you're now running a global organization. I said, my hat's off to you. And she said, oh, thank you so much. She said, I'm really, really humbled and touched by what you say. I said, you absolutely have been a role model for me. And sometimes, even role models don't know that they are a role model for someone. And we sometimes all need that little bit of feedback that, you know what, hey, you are actually doing a good job. And I don't think we do it enough to each other.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think it's, and it's hopefully, and I'm sure you're doing exactly the same thing as that person was doing to you, for somebody else within your teams, but it really kind of brings it right back down to what we talked about at the beginning, doing the basics really well, and building on top of those foundations, and just being a good person, I think, as well. I think that's a good example of a role model if you're just a good person. But what I'm interested in understanding from you, Kelly, what are the challenges of a modern leader?
I think, as you know, the technology world is moving, if not by the hour, every day, every week. There's some emerging technology or solution or something's, coming out in the public domain. As a technology leader or a modern leader, I think the key thing is, how do you stay relevant? How do you stay relevant to the organization? Why should they continue to hire you and keep you if you can't add value? So I think there are a couple of things here for me. First of all, you still have to be seen as that business advisor that is generating value for the organization. So how are you going to do that? You have to continuously, I think it's listening. I'm going to say listening to the organization, because organizations are adapting themselves almost so frequently. You see about, we hear about some of the big high street names just randomly going overnight. And, we've grown up with these. And the thing is, what happens is, if organizations are not able to adapt and change at a pace and to survive, unfortunately, some businesses do close. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because change and understanding the pace of change in an organization is really, really important. So you are then adapting your strategy as the business advisor to say, actually, okay, that's a part of our business, is whether it's doing good, bad, or indifferent. But I think we should also start looking at this, because what the board particularly is going to be looking for is innovation from you. And innovation doesn't mean you're scrapping everything that you've already got. And I think I just find the word innovation quite interesting, because it means different things to different people. So for me, it's about, how are you getting a return on investment in what you've already invested in? How are we making sure that continuous stream of value is flowing through the organization? And you can only do that through listening. Mm-hmm. Listening and taking it on board and taking time out to plan and think. And sometimes it's easy to say, actually, that change is happening. This is what I'm going to do. And, click a finger, you've got a plan and you're going to address it. And the most important thing, I think, for a modern leader, and I just touched on this a couple of seconds ago, really understanding the pace of change in an organization. The Royal Household, for example, was a great example of where there was a lot to do. But very quickly, I recognized that everyone is bought into the vision, but the pace had to work at a level, because there were so many other things that were happening in the organization as we started the conversation with, whether it was the Jubilee or the coronation. There's lots of very, very high profile things. And then you're trying to look at everything through a technology lens. So it's really, really important. And then you'll walk into another organization, for example, where I am right now, where speed is of the essence. And you're having to move at a slightly different rate, and then you're having to adapt and scale up, and having that ability to, that flexibility in your capability in your technology organization to scale up and scale down is also important, because what you're demonstrating is, I understand and I acknowledge, and I'm adjusting myself accordingly as the organization is adjusting itself accordingly as well. And I think that is so important, because I think that's where people can fail in roles, because they can't adapt at the same pace as the business is adapting and changing. And that's why they always say, you have to have eyes and ears everywhere. And this is where your stakeholder and your relationships in the business are really important. And having a few allies on the top table are really, really important, because, as you know, some CIOs are not on boards. They report into maybe a CFO or a CTO or some other role. But you have to have those allies there who are actually giving you that information. And then, it's a two-way communication. So you're providing information into the board, but you're also receiving back. And I think these are just a few things that, as a modern leader, you have to almost be ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important, some of these skill sets. And this goes back to the point we were talking about. Sometimes technology people, I'm saying I've worked with, are quite shy and don't actually want to face off to the board and say, hey, you know what? I don't think that's the right thing to do. Let's have a conversation around this. And you have to be quite bold and brave to be able to go into a board and say, actually, I think you're wrong. In my experience, actually, the board have welcomed a bit of challenge, because remember, they're not going to be technology experts, but what they are good at is running the business at a strategic level. So that's why I keep going back to being a true partner and advisor to the business is so critical for success in a modern leader's role these days.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the best piece of advice you received is?
Best piece of advice I've received? Actually, a few people I've worked with in the past, and actually it's my immediate friends as well as colleagues and peers I've worked with, is it's actually being authentic. And one of the things people say to me, what we like about you is you stand true to your values, true to your beliefs, and most importantly, integrity. Because what you say, you always do, and you always execute on that. And I think this is important, because I think part of, and particularly I think we try and conform to fit in the norm of an organization, because you want to be seen as part of the network or part of a particular group of people. And it takes guts to be the odd one out, because your values and beliefs may be different to somebody else, but that doesn't mean that you can't do your job. And so I think for me, the biggest piece of advice, actually, a lot of people say to me, you stay true to yourself and you always say what you will do. And the authenticity piece, I think, and they always say to me, you're the same person, whether you're in a board meeting or in a team meeting, you behave exactly the same way. And that becomes part of your authenticity of who you are as a leader. I've worked with a couple of people who say to me, I behave differently when I'm at work and I behave differently when I'm at home. And I always say to people, what you see is what you're going to get. And I might be a bit like Marmite. You might like me and you might not like me, but that is absolutely okay. And the reason why I say authenticity and staying true to yourself is because you have to demonstrate that I know my self-worth. And I think having over 15 years in my career, I think you can reach, if you by now you do not know your self-worth, I think then you probably need to reflect on your journey. And I think sometimes people get nervous about hearing whether it's negative feedback, because they may still be early on in their careers. Mm-hmm. So my advice, to anyone listening to this is be authentic, be true to yourselves, and absolutely hold to your own values and beliefs. And we are all individuals, and there definitely are organizations that have a particular culture that they want everyone to be similar mindsets, similar ways of working. Then you're not bringing diversity into the workplace. Because when I meet my team, I always say, I want you to challenge me, because I don't want yes people around me. I want people who challenge and we then come to a constructive outcome that moves the organization forward. Because if you have too many people like you and like yourself, then you're not really going to, I believe, succeed in that role.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a few, I think, nuggets for me, but I think my integrity and beliefs come back to me, and my values come back to me each time.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Kelly, those are all my questions. Thank you so much for your time today.
No, Brooke, thank you so much. It's been lovely to speak to you, and hopefully, people will find some of the insights particularly useful. I think when you're early in your career, it's always difficult to find people who have had a journey and it's not been easy. I think for me, I would just say to anyone who's on this journey, persevere and build resilience, because, there is a role for everyone out there. And one of the mottos that I have in life, when people say to me, "You can't," I always say, "I will show you how." And I would always say to everyone, aim high, because there's nothing that anyone can say or do that will stop you from achieving your dreams and your ambitions. And thank you so much. It's been brilliant to speak to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care then.